Hello out there and welcome to our Revere Veterans and Community Show. Today we have a special guest. He's from Mundo Television. He's Director of Sales and Marketing. His name is Alan Fitzmaurice. And Alan, thank you for coming on Revere TV.
Thank you, Morris.
I mean, working with Mundo Television and coming on Revere TV is an honor.
Well, it's an honor to be with a broadcast legend. As a proud resident of Beachmont, I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Mr. Fitzmaurice, can I call you Alan?
You can, yes, right. And I'll call you Morris.
You can call me by my first name.
Okay, or your last name. It works either way.
By the way, you started in TV at the age of 12.
I did actually. I always knew that I wanted to work in broadcasting. I have three passions in life: broadcasting, politics, and an interest in law enforcement, because I watched way too many episodes of Dragnet. But actually, I watched an episode of Dragnet this morning. But I was always fascinated with radio and television. I remember when my father had to repair this portable black and white TV and opened it up, and I expected to see Phyllis Diller running around in the TV. She was always on the TV doing the Biz Bleach commercials. I was very disappointed when she wasn't there. And back when 680 WRKO was the big rock and roll top 40 station, the program director had all the disc jockeys sounding the same, and I couldn't understand, even at like the age of 5 or 6, how that guy was on the radio all the time. But I called up what was then Warner Cable's Channel 13, and the cable systems were just having their contracts awarded by cities, and they were pretty much offering everything and anything to get the contract. And one thing that they had back then was called local origination, and I kind of refer to it as semi-professional TV. The broadcasters and the technicians and everything were paid, but they did a 15-minute newscast in the morning, and they did a veterinary show, and we had various shows, and I used to watch it. And I called up the program director and wanted to see about a job, and he said, well, we're really not hiring him, but you probably don't know much about the programming anyway. And I had watched it and rattled off all the programs, and he said, well, come in tomorrow and I'll give you a tour of the station. And he did, and I ended up staying about 4 or 5 years running camera for the news programs.
At the age of 12 you started?
Yeah, I started running camera at 12, and I was a production assistant. We did the high school football games. At that time, Warner Cable was in Malden, Medford, Everett, Somerville, Chelsea, and then they got Lynn and Salem, and then the Malden studio morphed into the Somerville studio, and then public access really took off, and people like yourself really started to produce much better programming.
No, I think you did an excellent job too, but thank you for the compliment. But I will say one thing. WRKO today,
yes,
at one time used to be a music station.
It was, yeah.
Now it's a talk show station.
That's correct, yeah.
What made a lot of them, if I may ask, Alan, go from music to talk show, where I thought the music was better?
Well, when FM came into prominence, and a lot of broadcasters didn't think FM was going to be anything.
Exactly.
A lot of, well, for example, Channel 5 had an FM license, and they gave it up. But when the sound quality was much better on FM, and really the first dominant FM station in Boston was WVBF 105.7, and that was really the beginning of the end for music on AM. And RKO in 1981 switched to an all-talk format. They brought Jerry Williams back from Florida and went all-talk, and they had a real nice run. But talk radio is, and especially WRKO, is a shell of itself. It was a great station back in the 80s, but the talk format is dying as well.
Is it?
It is, because it's too polarized. It's too negative. Advertisers don't want to be affiliated with that really controversial subject. Talk hosts like Rush Limbaugh's day has sort of passed, and there's also, I mean, the difference now is there's 24-hour news channels. There's a lot more of, there's the internet and blogs, and there's not a lot more avenues to get your information for politics and issues of the day.
Well, I think it's only 2 years ago that Al Jazeera came on the air.
That's right. That's right. Well, yeah. I mean, there'd been one cable system up in oddly enough, in Vermont, and I think one in Indiana that was carrying them. And now they're Al Jazeera America. They're struggling to find a foothold. The CEO was just let go last week, and
Of Al Jazeera?
Of Al Jazeera America.
Oh.
You know. And they're trying to find a niche audience, but it's really not broadcasting anymore. It's narrowcasting. I mean, when you can subscribe to not a well, I always think the cable bill is kind of expensive anyway, but when you figure you have 350 choices, by the time I figure out what's on, the program's over. So broadcasters are really targeting a niche programming. I worked at Channel 2 for a short time, and you know, Channel 2 is struggling because.
But they're public radio.
Public broadcasting, yes,
Yeah.
but they were also.
I mean public TV.
They back
public
when,
radio too.
Yeah, back when they were dominant, there was no Home and Garden channel. There was no All Food channel. I mean, Julia Child was the only game in town, or This Old House, and now you can turn on the TV and get that 24 hours a day.
Right. I got to ask you.
Yes.
I look at this over here. I
Yes,
hope they
yeah.
put it up on the air. This is a
That's a
championship.
Larry Bird
Yep.
basketball card. Well, what had
Yep.
happened was.
Maybe hold that up
I
with
think
the.
they have
There
that
it
up.
is.
There I am. That's in just after the 1984 NBA championship in the old Boston Garden in the locker room. I had just asked a very intelligent question to Larry Bird, and he was pondering the answer. But I think I was about, 84, I was about 19 then, I think. But what had happened was I was also involved in tennis in a big way. And I actually worked for Bob Kraft when he owned the Boston Lobsters. The Boston Lobsters still playing professional tennis here in Boston, but back in the 70s, Bob Kraft owned the team. And I was a ball boy and team statistician. In fact, I'm going to be honored at Center Court July 15th when the Boston Lobsters play up in Danvers. But I had run into Frank Shore, who was the sports director at the Warner Cable Channel 13, who I ran camera for. And I ran into him when I was in college at the airport, and he said to me, Major League Baseball was on strike, and the radio stations were struggling for some content. And he said, you know tennis, you should go over to the Longwood, which was the U.S. professional tennis tournament at the time in August. You should interview the players and sell it to the radio stations because they need to put something on. And I said, well, that's a good idea. So I called up, and I called up WEEI at the time, 590, and I said, if I go over to Longwood, would you pay me for some interviews? And they said, well, see what you can do, and we'll see if we'll pay you. So I went over and I interviewed the players and did reports for WEEI. But I saw these sports reporters who knew nothing about tennis doing it, and I said, well, I don't know that much about basketball or hockey, but so I guess I could do that. So I started calling radio stations and saying, radio stations outside of Boston, saying if I provided you with interviews after the game or reports during the game from Celtics and Bruins, would you be interested? And quite a few of them said yes. So that's how I worked my way through Emerson, was interviewing the players after the game and doing press conferences and anything that really needed to be covered. I actually interviewed, I've only been on a golf course twice in my life, and once was to interview Arnold Palmer at the Marlboro Seniors golf tournament.
He's still alive, Arnold Palmer?
He is, and that tractor in Latrobe is still running too. Yeah.
Oh. Tell us some of the great athletes that you interviewed. Just spend a little time with me.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a tremendous figure. I've also interviewed a number of celebrities. Jack Nicholson was a big Celtics fan, a Lakers fan. So
right.
he was in town when during the great Celtics Lakers championship series, and I interviewed Jack Nicholson at the Garden. Billie Jean King, I interviewed her a number of times.
That's a great tennis star.
Great tennis star, and just all of the professional baseball players at the time. Cal Ripken.
Any of my favorites on the New York Yankees?
I spent quite a bit of time with Whitey Ford.
I remember him.
Yeah, and Reggie Jackson.
Yep.
Reggie Jackson. But it was not during the time that I was working from basically 81 to 86, and then I did a little bit of work years later. But Red Sox that was not a fun time to be around the Red Sox at the time. John McNamara was the manager, and he was a miserable human being. Ralph Hulk was a very nice man, but it wasn't like it is today. It wasn't friendly Fenway, let's put it that way. But it was great to be at the Garden, great to be around the Celtics, and the Bruins always drew well, and they have one of the most passionate fan bases, I think, in all of sports. But I knew, so I'm working at, and I was hired by WBZ to produce the return of Calling All Sports. And I was doing that on the weekends, and I was working up at a radio station in Lowell, WCAP. And I wasn't making any money, and I wasn't that good, and I knew I wasn't that good, and I didn't know all that much about sports, and you know, I like sports, but I wasn't that passionate about it. So I wanted to move out of my parents' house, and I wanted to make some money and pay off my student loans. So I moved into to sales and marketing, and I started working for the producers of Harvard, Holy Cross, and BC Sports. And from there, I was recruited to go work for British Telecom, the British phone company, which this is sort of an interesting aside. In England at the time, there was really only 3 radio stations available: BBC One, BBC Two, and one semi-commercial station.
Can I say something to you,
yes,
Alan?
Yes.
You just mentioned BBC.
Yes.
Every morning when I wake up,
Yep.
WBUR, which
Yes.
is 90.9 on the
Yep.
FM band, the
Yep.
Boston channel,
Yep.
they broadcast the BBC
Yep.
News.
Yep.
And
The
I'll
World
tell you,
Service, yep.
And the reason I like to listen to them, because they can get into countries where our broadcasters cannot.
They don't. They do. They do a wonderful world view of the of what's happening in Africa,
Right.
and
Middle East, everywhere.
Exactly. And but there wasn't commercial radio as we know it. So oddly enough, people used the telephone for a lot of their entertainment. You would call up on the telephone to get the top 10 singles of the week. You would call up on the telephone to hear your favorite song when you wanted it. And in 1985, the government privatized the telephone company, British Telecom, and they were looking for new ways to get people to use the phone. So they had this whole division that produced telephone entertainment and information programs. For example, you could call up on the telephone from your office. Betting is legal in England, and people would hear calls of the horse race.
Racing,
yeah,
right.
Exactly. So so I went to work for them, and that was a tremendous opportunity to travel the world.
I want to put you on the spot now.
Yeah, put me on the spot.
Can I do that?
Yes, I'm well prepared for being on the spot.
You also did some broadcasting, I believe, for Boston College, Holy Cross, and Harvard.
Well, I did the no when I realized I wasn't really going to make a living as a broadcaster per se. As a sportscaster, I became the sales and marketing person for BC, Harvard, and Holy Cross. And I worked for the company that owned the rights to broadcast those games. And that was a good time because Doug Flutie was at BC.
Did you ever
Gordy
you met
Lockbaum.
them?
Oh, yeah. Gordy Lockbaum was at Holy Cross. Holy Cross went, I think they only lost one game that one year. And then Harvard always has a good fan base. So
Right,
that's how I got into selling the advertising and producing the games and working more behind the scenes.
I got to tell you, when I was a little younger,
Right.
which is a few years back,
Yeah.
Boston College was a predominantly team.
Yeah.
Holy Cross also.
Yes.
Harvard was one of the Ivy League teams,
Right,
which
right.
were not one of the great big teams.
No,
but
no,
Harvard now is starting to turn into a real good football team.
Yes, and well, they've always had good hockey teams, and yeah, well, the student athlete is very important over there at Harvard.
The thing I always like to ask people,
Yeah.
so well, since you're here,
Yeah,
I'm going to
sure.
ask you. You got to be an A student or a good student to be on the sports team at those colleges, or you just got to be a good athlete and a flunky student?
Well, I think it depends upon the program. I think that, in my opinion, I think at a lot of these major college programs, you're pretty much a professional athlete there. And I think that athletics is secondary. I mean, you'd be surprised how many students receive a certificate of attendance and don't actually graduate. A lot of them go back and get their degree at a later time. But I don't know that for certain. But it is I mean, if you're an athlete at a major college program, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of time, and it all depends upon the coach and the athletic director. But I know at Harvard, those student athletes at Harvard are they're going to class, and they're carrying a full academic load.
By the way, you also worked for KISS?
I did. I had the opportunity from 1986 to 1998 when I was in this, for lack of a better term, the telephone entertainment and information business, to live in London, in the Czech Republic, in Prague, in Toronto, New York City. I spent some wild times in Georgetown, Guyana.
Did you ever spend any time in Germany?
I did. When I lived in Prague, I used to take the train to Berlin for fun, and I did have quite a bit of fun in Berlin.
I have to tell you, you're going to laugh at this here. Up to about maybe 3 months ago, I did not know how to use a computer. Thanks to my friend, Mr. Dunbar, he taught me how to use the computer. So I decided to take a tour to Berlin. Now, I remember Berlin, when I was there, it was all rubble.
That's right.
I mean, completely rubble, level to the ground, except maybe for the Brandenburg Gate and a couple of other places. I look at Berlin today, and I see them one of the most beautiful cities in Europe.
It is. It is. They have a tremendous zoo, and when I was there, the big project was the Potsdamer Platz.
Potsdamer Platz, that's what the Potsdamer Bahnhof, I remember that where the trains all used to come in.
Yes, yeah, and that was great. And I went to, you go to East Berlin now, and it's
there is no more East Berlin now.
Well, I mean, where were the checkpoint Chicky there? You can.
That was the Brandenburg Gate. On the other side was East, and on it, I remember that.
You can take your picture there, what's left of the Berlin Wall, and they have a museum there. And I went to I traveled to Poland, went to Auschwitz, and in the salt mines in Krakow.
Oh, talking about Poland, they once sent me with a pouch I had to deliver on a little town just across the border. I didn't get deep into Poland. And I remember the name because I couldn't pronounce it at that time. It was called, maybe you've heard of it, Baranovici.
No, not familiar with that.
Right out of Leipzig, going there, just to drop off a pouch to one of the Soviets there at the time.
But I'll tell you, any American who has the opportunity to visit Poland, the Polish people love Americans. They roll out the red carpet. They're so thrilled to meet an American and have an American make the effort to come over and visit them. That you'll never be more welcomed in a country than you will in Poland.
Alan, I got to tell you why I like the Polish people. I do music at the senior center, and I play the polkas, and they are popular with the polkas over there. So I love them for that.
Yeah.
By the way, it says here, you lived in New York City, London, Toronto, Guyana?
Yeah, British Guyana. Well, it was called British Guyana. It's just now Guyana. It's the South American country with the sort of Caribbean feel. It's a small country. Unfortunately, most Americans just know Guyana because that's where Jim Jones had the mass suicide.
Right.
And well, not the man. He committed suicide, but he killed all those followers, but out in the jungle. But yes, I did live in Guyana for a while but in 1998 I came back and went to work. Wanted to get back into radio. I went to work at KISS 108 and was then a great station, AM 1430, WXKS AM, that played the music of your life.
Right. I remember as a young man, and I'm talking about 40, 50 years ago, 1430 used to play music by Mantovani and all those nice, easy listening type.
Yes, and you can still hear that music on the radio on AM 740.
I was at WJIB.
WJIB. Bob Bittner, who's a great broadcaster.
Have you ever met him?
I've talked to him quite a bit, and I know what he looks like, but I've never met Bob personally. He spends a lot of time now up in Maine.
Right. I noticed they used to play all the old songs on WJIB.
Right.
But as Bob Bittner got a little older, he started to bring in the more popular
Right,
songs,
right,
so
right,
he
right.
brought it more up to date
right,
with the music.
Right, but he runs that station without any commercials.
That's
and,
right. It's all donations.
So, well, he didn't even want to take donations, but what happened was one of the reasons when AM 1430 stopped playing music, more people started listening to 740, and his ratings started to creep up, and the fees that he has to pay for the rights to broadcast
Was
the
$80,000
music,
one
yeah,
year.
went up. And since he didn't run commercials, he made a little bit of money selling time on Sunday mornings to religious groups. But he didn't want to start paying commercials, so he said, well, if the listeners will support and send us money, and he does a little appeal for money until he has what he needs and pays it. But he runs that station out of a storage facility in Fresh Pond. And if you go by Fresh Pond, you can see the transmitter.
He has two
740.
stations, one here and one in Maine, I
One in
believe.
Maine, WJTO.
Well, that's the one.
WJTO. And that station was originally WCAS, which stood for Cambridge, Arlington, and Somerville. And it was owned at one time by the Kaiser Globe Broadcasting, which was the Kaiser Aluminum Foil Company and the Boston Globe.
Can I ask you a question
can.
about myself? If I may?
Yes.
I'd like to. I listen to the music on the radio.
Yeah.
And you know, they said it's illegal to download music. Then why do they make radios that way you can put a cassette in and copy it, or make a computer where you can put a CD and copy
Well,
it?
I mean, I don't know if you're not going to get into trouble if you record something off of the radio and you play it for your own personal use. The downloading really got into a problem area when people started to download the music and then file share it. So I would download music and then I would make it available for everyone on the internet to copy it. And,
I see.
And then that really cut down on the musicians' royalties and the record companies that spent all the money to develop this.
Right. Sometimes when I go on the computer and
Yeah.
download a song, there's a thing that comes across that says this song is copyrighted,
Right.
not for commercial use.
Right, exactly. But you can't. But if you did that for your own personal enjoyment at home, you're never going to get in trouble. But what some people don't realize is if you're playing a radio or tapes or something in a bowling alley or a restaurant or something, those commercial facilities have to pay rights and royalties to ASCAP for the right to do that.
What about the DJs that take the music and they go out and they play it and they get it off the internet or they get it off of the radio?
Well,
they
most
get
of the DJs, many of the DJs belong to record pools, record organizations that distribute that music to them.
Oh, I
and
see.
Many of the record companies look at that as a way to promote the music. But that's a good question. I don't know how the DJ who you hire now, and now it's very expensive to hire a DJ for a wedding or
Anything,
an event. I don't know how they get around paying the fees for the music that they play.
Right, but if you do things like I take some of my music and I go to the hospitals and play it for the patients.
I don't think you have much to worry about there because you're not deriving income from that. But if you were selling it, or if you were doing a mass distribution of it for people around the country, then you would have a problem.
Right. The reason I asked you that, they showed a program on TV one time about China. And China does a lot of downloading of our music, and they make the CDs that look like they were made in America, but they're not.
Right.
And then they ship them over here, and they sell them for about 1/10 the price. That is not legal.
No, that's bootlegging. I mean, that's counterfeiting, and that's not good. And I mean, it goes on today on the internet. There are programs that are released on the internet before they air on broadcast, and people.
And some of the movies that you come on the internet before they even come out on the theaters.
Right. But back when I was living in New York, and there was a funny episode of Seinfeld about this, that people actually used to bring a camcorder into
The
the theater
right.
and record it off the screen and then sell it out on the street.
Alan, we got about 2 minutes left. I want to give you a
This
minute
has
and a
flown
half.
by.
Yep, that went by so
Yeah,
fast, but I'm glad. Take a minute and a half and wrap it up for us. And
Well,
then
it's
I'll
just
finish.
great to be here. It's great to live in Revere. I've lived all over the world and lived in this area in Chelsea. I love Chelsea too, and down the street in Winthrop. But I love Revere. It's been a big part of my life for a long time. My father in Medford used to get up every Friday morning and drive to Revere, do the grocery shopping at Seratani's, and go to Revere Beach. And I love the city.
Alan, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on.
It's great to be here, Morris.
It was a pleasure and an honor to have you,
Right.
and
I
God
hope-
bless you.
And I'll come back anytime.
Thank you, thank you. And God bless our troops out there
That's right.
all over the world.
Yep.
Be safe.
Right.
I was a great mayor of the city of Revere,
Yeah.
Mayor Dan Rizzo,
That's right.
and the people of Revere. Until the next time we meet, folks, for another great show. I hope I hope we have a great as guest as you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, Alan.